We're now going to move on to the really important development this week of the anti-strike legislation, the Strike Minimum Services Level Bill. I'm very interested to find out what trade union officials and representatives think the future holds for striking. And on the call, we've got Mick Whelan from ASLEF. How are you doing? The General Secretary of ASLEF, sorry. How are you doing, Mick?
Good morning. How are we? I'm fine.
I'm good. Thank you for coming on. Now you're obviously within as a representative of a rail workers union. You'd be part of this legislation for minimum services. How do you? What can you tell us a bit about the legislation and how it will affect ASLEF?
Well, I'd like to tell you about the legislation, but it's a bit of a power grab. I mean, it's the only legislation we've ever seen that if they don't get what they want, that the secretary or the minister can just change the legislation without going through Parliament to up or down it or do what they want to do with it. So this is an increasingly desperate government, getting more and more right wing, increasingly, may I say, almost fascist. I mean, 4 or 5 years ago, the right wing media accused me of calling them Nazis. I didn't do that. Well, I actually said that with the way that they were going with the trade union bills, the way they were going with the lobby and transparency bills, taking away the voice of civil society, and increasingly with the 2016 Act, the protest bill, and now this bill, we're becoming very much like Spain, Germany and Italy in the mid-30s. And what sort of society do we want to live in? And rather than deal with the societal problems we have, they're becoming more and more authoritarian. Look, this won't solve anything. If anything, it will make strife worse. It'll make it longer, it'll make it harder. And you're more likely to have people not obeying the legislation and doing their own thing than carrying out a legislation that's clearly designed just to hurt the working class.
And what do you think should unions work together to I don't know, strike against this particular legislation? Is it worth taking on?
We've got to take it on. I mean, yeah, wherever you are, even the libertarians on the right wing are saying they've gone too far, which is interesting. They've gone so far that the far right are now saying this is the wrong place to be. Now, all these people who've voted for various freedoms and all those wars that took place in the early part of the century, right? It's ironic that we're entering into fascist tactics to get the government to prop itself up. Now, we have to be careful, of course, because of the law and because of the damages and stuff that's going to happen. But you've seen the summer of discontent. You saw the 500,000 people striking earlier this week. You saw people coordinating strikes. Now, it's not illegal to coordinate. It's illegal to take secondary action. So I can see much more coordination in future for the people to actually have their voice to challenge both this legislation on the streets and legally.
I mean, it's a bit vague as well, isn't it? The legislation, because I mean, what are essential services? I mean, it's kind of it could be a lot of industries, couldn't it? A lot of.
In the past, essential services were deemed to be the army, the police, and some strange reason, prison officers for obvious reasons. And essential services, when we were part of Europe, were deemed, and laid down, and it was never railways, it was never the health services, it was never anything else. What we have is a power grab by the Secretary of State for Business to include all areas so that nobody has the right to strike. The fact that then it's also changed. It was minimum service levels, right? Minimum service levels, and they spoke about how they have them in Europe and elsewhere. Show me one country where they're utilised. They're not utilised because they don't work. So quite simply, minimum service levels, even in France and other areas where they do have them, have never been used. And even then, they weren't allied to further human rights issues, such as taking away the right to strike. So if an individual didn't comply with the minimum service levels somewhere else, they didn't get sacked. If you saw a picket line and you'd be convinced by that picket line, because picket lines aren't really there to convince your own people not to cross the picket line. The picket line's there to convince other people not to cross it. But if you were convinced or just couldn't, out of all conscience, right, go into work while your fellow colleagues or comrades were out on the picket line, you wouldn't be sacked. That's in there. Then how come minimum safety levels? Well, that's a misnomer. What's safe about running part of a railway? And can you run a signal box for part of the day? Can you run, there isn't thousands of miles of sidings outside London stations to park up the trains at 10 o'clock in the morning to start them again at 1600 in the afternoon. So it's not about safety at all. This is about authoritarianism of the worst kind.
Right, yeah, I see. It's not practically, it can't actually be rolled out practically, but it's just a sign to all the right-wing people that they're doing something and they're being tough. I'm just going to bring on Louise Regan from the NEU to join it. How are you doing, Louise?
Morning, I'm fine, thank you. Sorry, I had to move to my phone, so I opened my laptop.
That's
why
all right.
You couldn't find me.
So I mean, teachers are being accused. I saw one. I put on GB News the other day, and they're all accusing teachers of ruining the country and stuff, and that you can't go on strike because it's essential. What's your response to that kind of talk?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because during COVID, when we kept schools open and when we kept educating young people throughout, and when we kept, teaching the children of key workers so that our key services could continue, we were praised for being brilliant and doing that. But now, because we're demanding that we have a decent pay award, and it's not about a pay rise, actually, it's about the fact that teachers have lost 23% in pay since 2010, support staff 27%. Now that we've beaten the thresholds, which we're the largest trade union in the UK to beat those thresholds, and I think the government genuinely didn't believe that we would do it. We have now taken one day of action, which was a hugely successful day. We've had a significant increase in membership already. 23,400 schools in England and Wales have been affected, but it is about those things, but actually it's about the fact that even when the government give us a pay award, so this year the offer is 5% averaged out, they're not putting any more funding into our schools, and our schools are not coping. There is not enough money in the system for us to do the job we need to do. So whilst our strike is about pay, because that's all we're legally allowed to strike about, what we know is we need more funding. We need to save our schools because the system is broken and this government doesn't want to invest in it. And what they keep saying, and I'm sick of government ministers telling me there isn't any money, they always seem to find money when they need it for their mates, for rubbish things like the rubbish PPE that they paid for during COVID. They found millions and gave it away to companies. But when we want to invest in our children's future, they don't want to pay for it. So I think education workers have had enough, and that was very evident last week. And we have got more strike days announced, and I think they will be bigger, because I think people that are doing the job are very committed to it, but they know that enough is enough. We have to do something now to save our education system.
Right. And do you think the government is just trying to flex its muscles to the media and its own supporters and make union bashing popular?
Absolutely,
with this legislation, and as Mick was saying, I think it's impractical. I mean, they can't really impose that on teachers, could they?
Well, what is a minimum service level in a school? Every class has to have a teacher in it. So that would automatically, if you're going to say every class has to be open, you have to have a teacher in there. Or are we going to say a minimum service level is you have to have so many teachers with all the children, squashed together in the hall for the day? I don't know what they even think it is going to be, but I think it is that they are intimidated. It's clear that the working class, the workers in this country, have had enough. And that they know that they are not winning. The other thing I want to say is they're trying to turn the public against us, but there was huge support last Wednesday for workers, not just education workers, all the workers that were out on strike last Wednesday. There was absolutely massive support because I think this government have been exposed for what they are. So I think they're trying to do something to turn people against us, but I don't think it will work. Because I think the public know that when it gets to the point that health workers, nurses, ambulance drivers, education workers, You know, those people that are running those key services are saying we can't function. You know, the system is broken. They know that we should they know that something is wrong.
Right. Well, I'm going to bring on Dave Jones from Unison, who's standing for their NEC elections. He's in the Wirral. How are you doing, Dave?
Hi, Crispin. I'm good, thank you.
Thanks for coming on. So, do you kind of agree with? I mean, with the health service, they're obviously trying to demonise anyone going on strike in the health service. So, do you see that as the same thing as what Louise and Mick are saying about this government just trying to flex their muscles, but there's no practical way they can enforce this legislation?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're facing increasingly desperate government. They're unpopular and they're trying every old trick in the book, failed tricks to try and find some popularity from somewhere, and it's not working. We know that the health service, to talk about that for a second, is crumbling. Everyone in the country knows it's crumbling, and we know who's to blame for that. There was an article in the Times today, sort of pondering, bemoaning, where's the lack of anger against the strikers? Because they're desperate to try and find some unpopularity, and they can't. And in the article, actually, in the hidden in the paragraphs, it came up with a reason why there's no anger. It said everyone can see the state of our public services, and we can. That's why we're getting the support. It's why the teachers are getting the support. It's why the rail workers are getting the support. You know, everyone can see that, and everyone is being hit. Every working class family up and down the country is being hit by the cost of living crisis. And I think, you know, this is a good time for us, you know, because people have had enough of austerity. They've had enough of the government, and they want to fight back. And I think absolutely we should be looking to escalate, to coordinate, and to build a real mass movement against this vindictive bill. And I think the 1st of February can just be a precursor to how strong we can build the movement, because it wasn't just the amount of people out on the strikes. There was thousands of people. I was out in Liverpool. There were thousands of people marching on the streets, not just those on strikes, loads of people supporting them, and the support in the streets as we were passing by, you know, was just overwhelming. This is a movement we can build, really.
Well, thank you, Dave. Now, Mick, do you feel actually energised by the support for strikes rather than the government's intimidation? Which is it? Has the government demoralised you, or has the government, in a sense, made things more encouraging for you with the support you're getting?
I've had 12 years of being demoralised with this government, but the people of this country are enthusing me. The summer of discontent now turning into this winter of discontent. The difference was last summer, we were all coming out in our individual silos as trade unions, sending each other solidarity and support, but each sector or each area, vocational or industrial, doing their own thing. Now everyone's coming together as one, right? And it's the nearest we're going to get to the poll tax riots, till our youth rise up against the things that they're doing to us elsewhere. And there's real risk here with this government. The more authoritarian they become, the more they risk that people are going to come out onto the streets, not in organised demonstrations, not in the way in which we're doing with the mass support we're getting both from our members and has been said by our colleague there from the general public, but just coming out on their own rights, because people are suffering. People are starving. People are using food banks. People, when you hear ministers saying, Steve Barclay wasn't it, who said, when somebody said to him, well, 1 in 4 nurses are using the food banks and the pay rise you're offering won't stop that. He said, well, we can't afford anything else. When you've got a government, when it condemned people to using food banks and boasting about opening warm banks and willing to see a proportion of the population, either staff, particularly the elderly, something's going to give. And this is the start of something giving.
Yeah. Louise, the response of the Labour Party, how do you see that as well? I mean, could Labour really be, in a way, capitalising on the wave of support for the strikes? I mean, they're losing out on this, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, there were Labour MPs out on picket lines, but I think they should be much more vocally speaking out in support of workers. You know, they are the party that was built from, you know, from the workers' movement. And you know, for me, I would really want to see them vocally everywhere saying that, you know, the government is failing our work, you know, the workers, failing our core services, our key services, and saying that they stand in solidarity with all those taking action. Because, I mean, that just is what you should be doing as a socialist, really. So, you know, I don't know why there would be anybody in the Labour Party that wouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, and finally, Dave, as a member of Unison, I mean, you're standing for the NEC. Do you think some unions should possibly, like, I'm not naming Unison particularly, but do you think some unions could be a bit more militant and speak out on stuff like this?
I think it's an obligation on all of us to be speaking out at the moment, and we know that our members, and you know, our members runs into hundreds of thousands in Unison, you know, are angry. You know, the laws make it difficult sometimes to get the turnout, but we need to be mobilising that, and we're seeing, you know, Unison has been taking strike action up and down the country. In my branch recently, we were due to take strike action in an FE college on Thursday, just gone. We got a 96% vote for strike action. The couple of days beforehand, the college, you know, came back with an offer that was substantially ahead of what they've had before. So when we're prepared to take action, we can deliver results, and we need to be doing that. And in terms of the Labour Party as well, we do need to see the Labour Party supporting us, but we can't afford to wait until the next election anyway. We need to be taking action now, because our members are struggling in this cost of living crisis now. So it's incumbent upon all of us to seize the moment.
Well, thank you very much for coming on, Dave. And Louise, good to see you again. And,
you too.
And thank you, Mick, for coming on too. Cheers.